Welcome back to Talooli Trails. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make a tree trunk pencil holder with a arrow pen to help remind you of summertime and camp. This is a project we made last summer and I really enjoyed making. Hopefully it's something you enjoy making also. It's made with things that you can find really easily around the house. This is a step up from our last video, so if you haven't checked out the last one, go check that one out. If you feel ready to take this one on, keep watching this video. The materials you will need for today's project include a bottle or a tin can. If you're going to choose a bottle, you're going to need to carefully cut it open so that it has a flat top. A tin can usually does that already for you. That's what I used for my example here. You also will need some tin foil. You will need some tape. I am encouraging you to use masking tape, and I'll talk about why in a few minutes, but if you have any sort of tape, that will work for today. I had some crayons in my project today. We'll talk about the different ways to color your project. You'll need some pieces of paper, and then you will also need a pen or a pencil and a hot glue gun. So that's all you need to create today's project. So first thing I'm going to do once I have my cleaned out can is I'm going to take a nice big sheet of tin foil. With this tin foil, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape it onto my can to start forming my base of my tree trunk. So as we know, trees are nice and crumply. That's why tin foil is a great choice for this, because if I just crumple it up a little bit and then pull it back out, I have a nice barky looking piece. Now if it rips a little bit, that's not a big deal. But now I have some good texture. Once I have the texture I like, all I'm going to do is I'm going to tape it around the outside of the can. So I would start with this as our base layer, and then I'm going to start showing you how to build it up so it actually looks like the bottom of a tree trunk. So I'll take my nice long piece, it's good to me. I'll add a piece of tape on one side, stick it on, and then wrap it around and tape the other side. Now I'm not going to tear off any of the excess yet because I'll probably squish and bend that so it ends up looking like roots or maybe a little tree branch. But again, I want to start with my pieces so that they look textured. They don't have to be taped on perfect, but you want them on there pretty tight so that they're not going to fall off. All right, so maybe I'll take another piece. Maybe I'll crinkle it up a little bit more so it looks like a vein in my tree. And then I will tape that piece on. Again, you can use any type of tape you have at home. I really would recommend that masking tape, and you'll see why, because when we go to add color, the masking tape's going to take that color the best, but use what you have. Alright, so at this point what I've done is I've added some extra tape on there just to make sure that it's on and not going to fall off, but as you can see I have these pieces that are hanging off. What I want to do with those is I don't want to take them off of my can entirely. I want to start squishing them and bending them so they look like part of that tree trunk. Especially around the base of it, trees have roots, we know this, so we want to make sure that the base is really thick and has some pieces coming off that are flat on the surface but will look like it's a tree root. So I'm going to squish this around. Maybe I fold it underneath. Same thing with up here. Maybe I'm going to fold that over the edge of the can. Have it come up a little bit. Think about this as a sculptural piece. We are making a sculpture of a tree. Alright, once I have my pieces on there, good. Now I can do my favorite part, which is adding some pieces on. So I'm just going to take my extra pieces of tin foil and make a little small piece. And all I'm going to do is roll it up like a snake, squish it into place, so that it kind of makes something that resembles a root or a tree branch. I think I need a little bit more. If you're going to do a tree branch, you want to make sure it's really nice and thick so that it's not just like wobbling off the end of our tree trunk. We want a good sturdy tree branch. So I'm going to add a little bit more. And what we need to make sure we do is we leave some room on the end of whatever piece we make to make a tap. I don't have this nice flat piece that I can tape, then I'm not gonna have my sturdy connection to my can. So I have my tab here, and I'm gonna again take a couple pieces of tape, probably one or two, and I'm gonna use that flat piece to tape my branch on. So let's see, I think I need some shapes, maybe right about there. That looks good. So I'm gonna tape the two sides down and make sure it's nice and sturdy. All right, so there's my tree branch. I like that one. Maybe I'll add another one. If I want to add some more shapes, I can take my piece of tin foil and maybe I'll make it into a little like circle-like shape so that we could imagine there were an animal living in there. So this is your time to play around with the different shapes you can make, just keeping in mind that whatever you make, you need to have some way to attach it to the base of your can. And the other thing we've talked about already, but I want to emphasize again, is that you want to have some roots on your tree. Roots make it look like a tree. So down on the bottom here, I might add some more pieces that look like our branches, but they're at the bottom and they're flat so that they sit flat on our desk. But those are gonna give it the shape of a tree branch or a tree trunk that was growing out into the earth, very similar to the octopus tree we have at camp. Again, I'm gonna leave a flat piece somewhere on there so that it'll stick really securely to the can. All right, so once you have built up your shape, it'll end up looking something like. The next step on our can is we need to seal all of this together. So there's a couple different ways you could do this ideally. If you were really a go-getter, you could do some paper mache over the top of this to make a nice smooth top layer. When we did this at camp, we decided not to use paper mache because that can get a little messy, it takes a lot of dry time. Rather than using paper mache, all that we did is we wrapped it in tape because the tape was already sticky and it made a nice base layer. So like I've suggested before, I would use masking tape for this. We're going to take a couple nice long pieces and we are going to start covering up all of the tin foil. We want a really nice piece that looks solid. So I'm just gonna take my tape and I'm gonna be careful not to squish all of the texture I have, but I'm gonna go around strategically, preferably in rows or stripes, and cover up my tin foil. My goal is to have no tin foil left on the outside. Okay, so I'm gonna start covering up just like I am here. When you do your tree trunks or your roots, it might be a little more tricky. So what I suggest is take a little piece and just like you wrap a band-aid around your finger, I'm gonna wrap my tape around my root or my branch. So I'm gonna stick it on and I'm going to wrap it around. Now, if it's not perfect against it, it's okay because again, that is building more texture for us. You can always use it to help secure those branches even more to the base of your tree trunk. All right, so I am going to work on wrapping up my tree here, and then I will show you the next step. So as you can see, I've finished wrapping my tree trunk here. I can't see any of the tin foil. I've wrapped it around the bottom and then I've also wrapped around the top here. What I would encourage you to do is do about an inch into our tree cup with your tape so that you don't lose the effect of the tree bark. You want it to still look like a tree when you're setting your pencils or pens into it. So I would wrap couple pieces of tape around the top. Again, it's really an awesome way to secure your tin foil by wrapping it over the edge and around the bottom. Once we do this, we are ready to paint it or decorate it to look like a tree trunk. So when he did this at camp last summer, we used shoe polish to give it its brown color and make it look like bark. When we used the shoe polish, we spritzed a little bit of water in there and we used a coarse paintbrush, and all we did is little circular motions all around the tree. That brought out our texture on here and it gave it a beautiful brown color. I don't have any shoe polish here at home. If you do, I would encourage you to try that method. It's very cool. But some alternatives while we're at home is you could use acrylic paint and you could make it so it looks like texture, or you could do something called a wax resist using crayons and watercolors or any other water-based paint. So with the crayons, what you would do is you would rub it just like you're doing a surface rubbing, and that'll help bring out some of the texture. And then you could use a water-based paint over top, and seeing that the crayons are made out of wax, it will resist the paint and leave both colors, making it look very, very cool. So I think that's the method I'll probably go with. But if you ended up using duct tape or Scotch tape, those crayons aren't going to stick to this. Your best bet is to use an acrylic paint on that. So use what you have at home to decorate today. So I have my box of crayons here, and I'm only going to be using the colors that I think are tree-like. If you want a really fun, colorful tree, go for it. But I'm going to use a brown, maybe a tan. Let's see, what else? Maybe we'll add some black in there to make it a little darker. Maybe some green, why not? So like I mentioned, when we're using our crayons, we're trying to bring out our texture. So instead of going straight down with the crayon, I'm going to use the side of the crayon, and I'm just going to rub it over the top of my tape. Oh, this is looking good. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe I only want green in a couple spots so that it looks mossy. Again, don't forget to do the inside of your can. We want to keep that effect. This is it so far. You can see the texture already starting to come out. Let's see, maybe I'll use some black. Again, using the side of it allows me to get the texture without actually drawing like I'm drawing a picture. We're not drawing a picture here, we're making a tree. Okay, so I have colored it all. A really important thing to remember is I am not trying to color this whole can with crayons. That is going to be nearly impossible. The thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get texture, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that. My next step is I'm going to paint it. So like I mentioned, you could use whatever type of paint you have at home, but keep in mind if you're using one of these shiny paints, the only one that I really think is going to stick is an acrylic, okay? So I have some paint water here, and I have a couple different types of paints. I'm not quite sure which one's going to work best, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to test them out with the tape I have here on the bottom. I'm going to try out my watercolor paints that I have, and I'm going to use a brown. Normally, I am a person who loves to mix my paints and loves to play around with color, but since I added all of this color in crayon, I don't have to worry too much about adding any more texture. I think this paint's going to work. So I'm going to use this one here. This is a watercolor base paint, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to get a nice big paintbrush and some water, and I'm going to start painting my whole can. So like I mentioned, if it is a water-based paint, that wax is going to resist. You can already see it starting to come through, but if I want to make sure it's going to actually show up, what I can do is I can use paper towel or a napkin, and I can just kind of pat down on it. That took away a lot of my paint. So if I were to do that again, I think what I would do is I would paint it and let it dry a little bit, and either let the wax resist it itself, or I would do it once it's more dried into my tape there. So I am just going to paint my whole can. Once I'm done painting my can, I'm going to set it somewhere to dry, and then I'm going to show you the next step of how to make some pens or some pencils that look like arrows, just like we have at camp when we do archery. So I will paint this, and then I will be right back with you guys to show you that next step. here is my finished product. It looks just like this. One thing I did that you might want to try on your cup is I did something called dry brushing, where I took my paintbrush and I put it in some black paint and I made sure it was really, really dry. And then all I did is that I lightly rubbed it over the surface, so it again brought out that texture and gave my tree more of an aged look. So this is my finished pencil cup holder. I'm going to place that out on the side. And now what I'm going to show you to do is how to make our arrow pens. So to make the arrow pens, you can either use a pen or a pencil, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to use a pen today. And you do need a glue gun for this. So if you have not used a glue gun before, or if you aren't really sure how to use one, please, please, please make sure you have an adult help you do it, because we don't want anyone to get burned. So I have my pen, and then the next thing I'll need is some sort of paper. I have these little pieces of index card. I would recommend something that's a little thicker, like index card or cardstock, because then it'll give our feathers that we're going to put on our paper a little bit of stability. If we use normal printer paper, they might be a little floppy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shape of half of one of our feathers that we see on our arrows when we're at camp. So when we look at our arrow, we think about that funny feather, and when we're looking at it, it looks something like half of a heart. So I'm going to draw a straight line, and then kind of like half a heart shape, just drawn out a little bit. So something maybe like that. I'm going to compare it to the size of my pen. Now the one I drew might be a little big. I don't know if I can fit my hand on there to write, but I'm going to say that's okay for now. So you can do this two ways. You can either freehand draw all of your arrow feathers, or you could draw one. Once you have one that you like, you can use that as a stencil to trace the rest so that they are all the same size. So I'm gonna trace mine. Now when we think of the arrows that we have at camp, we think of how many feathers are on them. The answer is 3. And we also have a very special feather. That feather is called, I'll give you a second to think about it. Yes, our funny feather. So we have our funny feather, which is a different color. So I'm actually going to color mine, and when I do that, I'm gonna have 2 that are same, and then I'm gonna give myself 1 funny feather. So again, I'm gonna trace those, and then I'll cut them out, and then I will show you the next step. If you have any colored paper, specifically if you have any paper that's maybe scrapbook paper and has patterns or different shapes on it, this is a really cool time to use that, because it will make your feathers look super duper cool. I only have white paper here, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna decorate my paper myself by coloring it with some markers. I have decorated my funny feathers, so they look just like this. All I did was I colored them with some markers. When you cut these out, one thing that's really important to remember is, just like we needed a tab to put on our tree trunk, any branches onto our tree trunk, we need a tab to glue these feathers to our pen right now. Right now, if I look at it, it's a skinny piece of paper. That's not a lot of places for me to add that glue, so it's really sturdy on my pen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold over just a little tiny tab. And from that tab, that's where I'm gonna glue. Okay? So if when you cut your feathers out, they weren't big enough to do this, just cut out another one and leave some space so that you have some room to fold. Once I fold, it's time for the glue gun. If I wanted to, you could add some little slits so that this looks a little more feathery. However, when you do that, you cannot cut through your tab. I would add like 3 or 4, gives it a little shape, but doesn't make it too skinny. All right, so add your slits if you would like. Again, don't cut through that tab. We need a really sturdy place to put our glue so that our feathers stay onto our pen. All right, so I'm gonna grab my glue gun, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to add my glue onto the little tiny tab there, and then I'm going to take it and take the end of my pen and stick it on there. Now this part where I wanna be really careful, I don't wanna burn myself. If I have to, I can maybe use a different pencil or something else to stick this down. Again, you should have a parent who's either helping you or watching you while you do this. All right, so my first feather is on. I want to space them about 3 feathers apart. And when I do it, I'm going to keep my tabs so they all go the same way. That acts as a really nice spacer so that my feathers are all even. This is our finished tree trunk pencil cup and our finished arrow pen. I hope you guys enjoyed this project. Please share a comment if you have a project you would like to see made. Shout out to Mila for sharing her pictures of God's eyes from our last video. If you have a project at home that you've made, share a picture with us so that we can see it. Thank you for joining me on Talooli Trails. Have a good day.